The winter wind howled through the empty streets of Chicago as a young boy huddled deeper into his worn jacket. At just 12 years old, he had already learned more about survival than any child should ever know. The cardboard box he called home sat hidden behind an old bookstore, sheltered from the worst of the weather by a rusty fire escape. 3 months ago, his life had been different. He had a warm bed, hot meals, and his mom's loving smile to greet him every morning. But then she got sick, really sick. The hospital bills piled up faster than autumn leaves, and soon they couldn't afford their tiny apartment anymore. With his mom still in the hospital and no family to turn to, he found himself alone on the unforgiving city streets. But this boy was different. Despite everything life had thrown at him, his spirit remained unbroken. Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise and help Mr. Wilson, the kind-hearted owner of the corner store, arrange his newspaper stand. In return, Mr. Wilson would give him a warm cup of hot chocolate and sometimes even a day-old sandwich. "You're a good kid," Mr. Wilson would often say, watching him carefully arrange the newspapers. "Don't let the streets change that about you." After his morning routine at the newspaper stand, he would spend his days collecting bottles and cans from behind restaurants and stores. Some days were better than others. On lucky days, he'd find enough to buy a warm meal from the dollar menu at the fast food restaurant. On others, he'd have to make do with leftover bread from the bakery dumpster. The other homeless kids in the area had tried to recruit him into their group. They survived by picking pockets and snatching purses, but he always refused. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Your character is who you are when nobody's watching." Even now, with Pam lying in a hospital bed, he couldn't bear the thought of disappointing her. At night, he would climb up to the roof of the abandoned building where he sometimes sought shelter. From there, he could see the whole city stretched out before him, its lights twinkling like fallen stars. He would talk to his mom, even though she couldn't hear him, telling her about his day and promising her that somehow things would get better. He kept a small notebook, salvaged from a school dumpster, where he wrote down his dreams. Some were simple: eating a hot meal, sleeping in a real bed. Others were bigger: finishing school, becoming a doctor who could help sick people like his mom, buying a house where they could live together again. Most people would call these dreams impossible for a homeless kid, but he held onto them like precious gems. Life on the streets had taught him to be invisible when needed and resourceful when possible. He knew which restaurants threw away good food, which public bathrooms were safe to use, and which librarians would let him sit inside during the coldest hours of the day. The library became his sanctuary, a place where he could escape into books and pretend, just for a little while, that he was living a different life. Despite everything, he never lost his kindness. He shared his food with a stray cat that lived behind the bookstore. He helped an elderly woman pick up her groceries when her bag broke on the street. He even gave his only blanket to a younger kid who had just ended up on the streets, remembering how scared he had been during his first few nights alone. Little did he know, his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. Sometimes the biggest miracles come disguised as the smallest choices, and tomorrow would test everything his mother had ever taught him about doing the right thing. The evening sky had turned a deep purple when the boy made his way behind the fancy restaurant on 5th Street. This was usually his lucky spot. The chef often left out untouched bread, and sometimes even whole meals that customers hadn't finished. But tonight, something else caught his eye. As he moved his flashlight across the ground, searching for any forgotten treasures, a sudden sparkle made him freeze. There, nestled between two cobblestones, something gleamed like a star fallen to earth. His heart began to race as he carefully picked it up. It was a ring, but not just any ring. Even in the dim light, he could tell it was special. Tiny diamonds surrounded a larger stone in the center, and the whole thing seemed to dance with light. The white gold band felt heavy in his small palm. This wasn't costume jewelry from the dollar store. For a moment, time stood still. His mind raced with possibilities. This ring could change everything. He knew a pawn shop 3 blocks away that didn't ask questions. With that money, he could buy warm clothes, real food, maybe even help with his mom's hospital bills. But then his mother's face flashed in his mind. He remembered sitting on their old couch, her arms around him as she told stories about his grandfather. He worked as a janitor, she'd said, and one day he found a wallet full of cash. Even though we barely had food that week, he turned it in. That's what makes a person real rich, not what's in their pocket, but what's in their heart. The boy sat down on an empty crate, still staring at the ring. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday. A warm bed at a cheap motel would feel like heaven right now, just for one night. But deep down, he already knew what he had to do. This ring belonged to someone. Maybe it was their engagement ring, or a family heirloom passed down through generations. Someone out there was probably crying right now, searching desperately for it. He wrapped the ring carefully in a clean napkin he'd been saving and tucked it safely in his deepest pocket. Tomorrow, he would come back and ask around. Maybe someone at the restaurant would know who lost it. It wouldn't be easy. Some people looked at him suspiciously just for being nearby, and the security guard usually shooed him away from the front entrance. That night, curled up in his cardboard shelter, he kept touching his pocket to make sure the ring was still there. The stray cat he befriended purred against his side, providing a bit of warmth. As he drifted off to sleep, his mom's words echoed in his mind. Life's biggest tests don't come with warning bells. They sneak up on you in small moments when nobody's watching. He dreamed of his mother that night, seeing her smile proudly at him. In his dream, she was healthy again, standing in a sunlit kitchen of their own home. "Keep your heart pure," she always said, "and life will show you the way." Little did he know, as he slept in that alley with a fortune in his pocket, that his moment of truth was about to arrive. Sometimes the universe has a way of testing our character first, before leading us to our destiny. And tomorrow would be the day that would change not just his life, but the lives of many others. Morning came with a mix of determination and nervousness in the boy's heart. He hadn't slept much, the weight of the diamond ring in his pocket keeping him awake most of the night. After helping Mr. Wilson with the morning newspapers, he made his way to the fancy restaurant, his worn shoes feeling heavier with each step. The morning staff was just arriving, carrying their coffee cups and chatting among themselves. The boy gathered his courage and approached a kind-looking woman who was unlocking the front door. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice shakier than he'd hoped. "Did anyone lose something valuable here yesterday?" The woman looked him up and down, her expression changing from surprise to suspicion. "Why do you ask?" she questioned, pulling her purse closer to her side. The boy's heart sank. He knew that look all too well. It was the same look he got when people saw him collecting cans or seeking shelter from the rain. I found something," he explained, keeping his voice steady. "Something important. I want to return it to whoever lost it." The woman's face softened slightly, but before she could respond, the security guard appeared, waving him away from the entrance. "No loitering, kid. You know the rules," the guard said firmly. The boy tried to explain, but the guard wouldn't listen. He backed away, his chest tight with frustration, but he wasn't going to give up, not when he was doing the right thing. Throughout the day, he tried different approaches. He spoke to the valet parking attendant, who just shrugged him off. He attempted to talk to customers entering the restaurant, but most hurried past, avoiding eye contact. One elderly man even threatened to call the police. By afternoon, hunger gnawed at his stomach, and doubt crept into his mind. Maybe he was being foolish. The ring felt heavy in his pocket, like it was testing his resolve. A couple walking past him wore expensive clothes and jewelry. They wouldn't even miss something like this ring, would they? The pawn shop was looking more tempting with each passing hour. Then he remembered the last time he'd seen his mom before she got sick. They'd been watching an old movie together, sharing their last bag of microwave popcorn. "Life is full of hard choices," she told him, "but doing the right thing is like planting a seed. You might not see the results right away, but something good always grows from it." Taking a deep breath, he decided to try one last time. This time, he went to the back of the restaurant where he usually found the discarded food. A young dishwasher was taking his break, sitting on an upturned milk crate and scrolling through his phone. The boy approached carefully, and to his surprise, the dishwasher looked up with a friendly smile. "Hey, buddy," he said, offering half of his sandwich. "You looking for the usual leftovers?" "Actually," the boy said, accepting the sandwich gratefully, "I need help. I found something really important last night, and I need to return it to its owner." He explained about the ring, careful not to take it out in the open. The dishwasher's eyes widened. "Wait right here," he said, jumping up. "Don't move." "I mean it." I know exactly who you need to talk to." As the boy waited, finishing the shared sandwich, he felt a strange mix of hope and fear. He'd come this far, there was no turning back now. What he didn't know was that in just a few minutes, his entire world was about to change, all because he'd chosen to listen to that quiet voice inside that told him to do the right thing. The kitchen door swung open, and the dishwasher returned with a well-dressed woman following close behind. She was wearing a doctor's coat, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. The boy's heart started beating faster. He knew this must be the ring's owner. "Is it true?" she asked softly, kneeling down to meet his eyes. "You found something behind the restaurant?" Her voice was gentle, unlike the harsh tones he'd faced all day. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of his mother, a kind of warmth that made him feel safe. The boy nodded and carefully reached into his pocket, pulling out the napkin-wrapped ring. His hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped it. The woman gasped as the diamonds caught the afternoon light, sparkling just as brightly as when he'd found them. "My grandmother's ring," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I've been searching everywhere. I couldn't sleep last night thinking it was gone forever." She looked at the boy with wonder. "You've been trying to return this all day?" He nodded again, explaining how the security guard had turned him away and how no one would listen. As he spoke, the woman's expression changed from joy to concern, especially when his stomach growled loudly in the middle of his story. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" she asked, her doctor's instincts taking over. The boy shrugged. He'd lost track of days. The half sandwich from the dishwasher had been his first food since yesterday morning. The woman stood up suddenly. "Wait here," she said firmly, then turned to the dishwasher. "Please make sure he doesn't leave." She hurried inside, the ring clutched tightly in her hand. The boy thought this was the end of his story. He'd done the right thing, and that was enough. But 10 minutes later, the woman returned with a bag full of hot food and a determined look on her face. "First, you're going to eat," she said, setting the food down on a clean crate. "Then, you're going to tell me your whole story." As he ate the first hot meal he'd had in weeks, the boy found himself telling her everything about his mother's illness, the lost apartment, his nights in the alley, and his morning routine with Mr. Wilson. The woman listened intently, asking gentle questions, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "You know," she said finally, twisting the recovered ring on her finger, "I've been working as a children's doctor for 15 years. I've seen many young people in difficult situations, but I've never met anyone with your integrity. This ring, it's worth more than most people earn in a year." The boy looked down at his empty plate, embarrassed by the praise. "My mom always says doing the right thing matters more than money," he said quietly. The woman was silent for a moment, then reached for her phone. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," she said, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. "I'd very much like to meet her." She looked up at him with determination in her eyes. "In fact, I think I might be able to help both of you." The boy's heart skipped a beat. Could she really help? He'd learned not to hope too much. Hope could hurt worse than hunger sometimes. But something in the woman's voice, in the way she looked at him with such genuine concern, made him think that maybe, just maybe, his mother had been right all along about good deeds planting seeds. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of changes. The kind doctor had made several phone calls right there in the alley, speaking quickly into her phone about medical transfers and special cases. The boy could hardly believe what was happening as she explained that she would help move his mother to the hospital where she worked. "Your mother's current hospital isn't equipped with the specialized care she needs," she explained, driving him to see his mom the next morning. "At our hospital, we have better facilities and a team that specializes in cases like hers." The boy sat quietly in the passenger seat, afraid that if he spoke, he might wake up and find it was all a dream. When they arrived at his mother's hospital room, he ran to her bedside. She looked thin and tired, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "My baby," she whispered, pulling him close. "I've been so worried." The doctor stood in the doorway, watching with gentle eyes as mother and son reunited. As his mother's health steadily improved under the new treatment plan, more changes began to unfold. The doctor had contacted child services, but not to separate them. Instead, she helped arrange temporary foster care with a loving family who lived just 10 minutes from the hospital. The boy now had a warm bed, regular meals, and even new clothes that actually fit him. "You saved my grandmother's ring," the doctor told him one afternoon while visiting his mother. "But more than that, you showed me that there's still pure goodness in this world. Now it's my turn to help." His new foster family drove him to visit his mother every day after school. Yes, school. He was back in classes, catching up on the months he'd missed. The other kids were surprised by how quickly he learned, not knowing that all those hours he'd spent reading books in the library had kept his mind sharp. Mr. Wilson from the newspaper stand nearly cried when the boy came to visit him, wearing clean clothes and carrying a proper backpack. "I told you were a good kid," he said proudly, giving him an extra-large hot chocolate. The boy made sure to tell Mr. Wilson the whole story, thanking him for being kind when nobody else would look his way. Even the stray cat from the alley found a home. The boy's foster family agreed to adopt it after hearing how he had shared his food with it during his harvest days. Now the cat slept on a proper cushion instead of cardboard, just like its young friend. But the biggest change was in his mother's eyes. Day by day, as the new treatments began to work, the worry lines on her face softened. Color returned to her cheeks, and her smile grew stronger. The doctor visited often, not just as a physician, but as someone who truly cared about their well-being. "You know what this reminds me of?" his mother said one evening as they shared a proper dinner in her hospital room. "Remember that story I used to tell you about the bread your grandfather gave away? How one act of kindness led to another." The boy nodded, thinking about how a single moment, finding that ring, had set off a chain of events that changed everything. But it wasn't just about finding the ring, was it? It was about what he chose to do with it. Looking out the hospital window at the setting sun, he realized something important. Sometimes the darkest moments in life are just the beginning of a brighter story. His mother had always taught him that goodness finds its way back to you. He just never expected it to happen quite like this. As winter melted into spring, hope bloomed like the flowers in the hospital garden. The boy's mother grew stronger each day, moving from her bed to a wheelchair and finally taking small walks in the corridor. The doctor had arranged for her to receive physical therapy, and though progress was slow, it was steady. "You've got your mother's determination," the physical therapist would say, watching the boy help his mom practice her walking exercises. He never missed a session, rushing from school to be by her side, his backpack full of completed homework and good grades to share. The foster family had become like a second family to them both. They understood that the boy needed to be with his mother as much as possible, so they arranged their schedule around hospital visits. On weekends, they would bring board games and snacks, turning the sterile hospital room into a warm gathering place. One particularly sunny afternoon, the doctor brought unexpected news. She had been working with the hospital administration and a local housing program. "We've found an apartment," she announced, smiling at their surprised faces. "It's small, but it's in a good neighborhood near the school. Once you're discharged," she said to the boy's mother, "it'll be ready for both of you." But that wasn't all. The doctor had also spoken with the hospital's human resources department. "We have an opening for a patient care coordinator," she told the boy's mother. "The hours are flexible, and you can start part-time as you continue your recovery. Your experience as a patient will help you understand exactly what other families are going through." The boy watched his mother's eyes fill with tears of joy. For the first time in months, he saw the spark of independence return to her face. She wouldn't have to rely on charity forever. She could build a new life for them both. His own life had transformed too. His teachers had noticed his potential and recommended him for advanced classes. The same determination that had helped him survive on the streets now drove him to excel in his studies. Math, science, history. He soaked up knowledge like a sponge, making up for lost time. The local newspaper even wrote a small story about him, not mentioning his name to protect his privacy, but telling the story of a homeless boy who chose honesty over desperation. The article sparked a community discussion about helping homeless youth, and several local businesses started programs to provide jobs and support for teens in need. The boy kept a journal now, writing down his experiences and thoughts. One evening, while sitting beside his mother's hospital bed, he read her what he had written. "Sometimes the hardest choice and the right choice are the same thing. But doing the right thing isn't just about that one moment, it's about believing that goodness creates more goodness." His mother reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You taught me something too," she said softly. When I was at my lowest, feeling like I had failed you by getting sick, you showed me that I must have done something right in raising you. Your strength gave me the courage to keep fighting." As they sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, they knew that their darkest days were behind them. But more than just surviving, they had discovered something precious. When you hold on to your values even in the hardest times, you don't just change your own life. You create ripples of change that touch countless others. 5 years had passed since that cold night when a young boy found a diamond ring behind a restaurant. Now, standing at his high school graduation podium as valedictorian, he looked out at the crowd and saw all the faces that had become part of his journey. His mother sat in the front row, healthy and proud, wearing her hospital staff badge and the biggest smile he'd ever seen. Beside her sat the kind doctor who had changed their lives, still wearing his grandmother's ring that had started it all. The foster family who had given them a home during their hardest times was there too, cheering just as loudly as if he were their own son. Even Mr. Wilson had closed his newspaper stand early to attend, bringing with him a hot chocolate for old time's sake. The stray cat, now a pampered house pet, was probably napping at home on its favorite windowsill, unaware that its former alley companion was receiving a full scholarship to medical school. "When I was 12, he began his speech, his voice steady and clear. I learned that life's biggest moments often come disguised as its hardest choices. I learned this lesson not in a classroom, but on the streets of our city." He shared his story not of the hardships, but of the kindness he had found. The restaurant worker who shared his sandwich, the librarians who gave him shelter on cold days, and most importantly, the people who believed in second chances. "Today, I'm not just celebrating my graduation," he continued. "I'm celebrating the power of simple honesty. One small choice can start a chain reaction of goodness that transforms not just one life, but an entire community." He spoke about the youth program he had started at his school, where students volunteered to help homeless teens with tutoring and support. The program had already helped 30 young people return to school and find stable housing. Some of them were in the audience today, their own graduation caps waiting for next year's ceremony. His mother's new job at the hospital had blossomed into a career. She now ran the Patient Support Services Department, helping other families navigate the same challenges they had faced. The small apartment they had started in was now their own home, bought with years of careful saving and hard work. The doctor who had helped them had gone on to create a medical assistance program for homeless youth, inspired by their story. Other hospitals across the country were starting to adopt similar programs, creating a ripple effect of positive change. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, the boy, now a young man, took a moment to walk behind the school building. He pulled out his old journal, its pages worn and filled with 5 years of memories. On the first page, he had written the words his mother taught him: "Your character is who you are when nobody's watching." He smiled, adding one final line: "And sometimes, when you let your character shine in the darkest moments, the whole world starts watching and learning how to shine too." That evening, at a small graduation party in their home, surrounded by the family they had found and the family they had chosen, he realized that their story wasn't just about a lost ring or an act of honesty. It was about how hope, like light, can start as a tiny spark but grow to illuminate countless lives. His future stretched bright before him: medical school, a chance to help others, and a platform to share his message that no one is ever truly alone. But more than any achievement or accolade, he was proudest of staying true to the values that had guided him through those cold nights on the streets. As the sun set on his graduation day, he knew that this wasn't the end of his story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. After all, the greatest adventures often start with the smallest acts of kindness, passed on from one heart to another, changing the world one choice at a time.